And Andrew, I will turn it to you to go ahead and start with opening statements, and I'll start the timer.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you to the entire Fresh and Fit audience for coming out, and to DGG as well. We're here today to debate if the events of the January 6th Capitol riots were an insurrection or if they weren't. Simple. It's a simple debate prompt. They either were or they weren't. Looking into the idea of insurrection itself, it isn't exactly clear what the meaning of it is. It does always seem to be tied together with violence or some will to overthrow a government, law, government system, government itself, or resistance to that law, or something akin to this. The Supreme Court hasn't given us any guidance on this as they wash their hands of it, and to date, not a single person has been charged or convicted of insurrection who participated in any of the J6 rioting. This includes Donald Trump himself, who was acquitted of inciting insurrection. You would think, with no clear guidance of what an insurrection is, a lack of anybody being prosecuted for this supposed insurrection who participated, and a president acquitted of inciting one, that would be that. The events of January 6th were a protest that turned into a riot. This is nothing new. Democrats do it all the time. In fact, Destiny in 2021 completely agreed with my current assessment. Please, if you don't mind, play clip 1.
Okay. You think the majority of the people there were actually trying to do that, and all they managed to do was kill one woman got shot by the cops? You're fucking delusional. I think most of the people probably showed up to protest because they were fucking mad, and then shit got riled up. There were probably, almost for sure, I would say, some genuine bad actors there that had fantasies of invading the fucking Capitol and shit. Now, I think I heard from the FBI that it was 5% or less had some plan to do something. Even that number sounds a little bit high, because 5% of however many thousand people, there's a lot of people. But I don't think every single person who went there, their goal was to destroy the White House or destroy the Capitol building and take it over. But because if they were, we would have saw way more shit.
Okay.
Now, just so you know, I have no visual on my end when those play, and I'd appreciate it if you guys could put the visual up on my end as well.
Okay.
In fact, Destiny even agrees such rioting and political violence is part of the democratic process, akin to voting, he says. He said this to justify the George Floyd or BLM riots, that such riots were just one side of the Democrat coin and baked in to our Democrat process. The tail's in, and just the other half of democracy, he says. Of course, he later denied this. Please play clip 2.
Okay. Bills, go ahead.
A disingenuous sack of shit. Because, as I've debated you in the past, you started talking before January 6th ever occurred about how the BLM riots were justified. It was just the other side of the coin of voting. Of course, once you realized that grip wouldn't do as well for you when you were debating the Rittenhouse shit, you completely 180'd your position.
Did I ever say rioting is the other side of the coin of voting?
Probably did.
That's a really strange statement if I did. If I did, that's a really strange statement. But go ahead, okay.
I'm trying to find the clip.
Activism and riots are one side of the coin and the other side is voting. I don't think there's conspiratorial at all. I think that affecting political change like this is fine. That's part of the goal. Like activism and riots are one side of the coin and the other side is voting.
Okay.
Woo.
And we're 3 minutes and 20 seconds in. Go ahead.
So why the radical change of heart on this topic from Destiny? This complete 180? Well, that's simple. He hates Donald Trump. A simple motivation, but at least understandable. He also hates Trump supporters. In order for him to justify that he wants them all to be unalived, he needs to brand them all as traitors and insurrectionists. In this way, he can build a case that Trump supporters are evil, and so it is justified to use violence against them. To recap that, Trump supporters are evil, therefore anything which happens to them is fine. Going so far as to say his friend Pisco, the only reason he wouldn't have liked Trump to have been unalived by this would-be assassin is because it would motivate Republicans. This, of course, gives us an entailment that if it wouldn't motivate Trump supporters, he would be fine with Trump having met his demise in this assassination attempt. And this is the last clip. Play clip 3, please, and then I'll wrap this up.
Okay.
So far beyond that. So far giving a fuck beyond any of these fucking losers. But go ahead, yeah, sorry.
Can I ask you a question? So, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to.
Yeah.
Do you wish the attempt had been successful?
Do I wish that the attempt had been successful? Fuck, am I even allowed to say anything about that?
You don't have to answer that.
Here's what I'll say. This is what I will say. I don't know, because I'm trying to Fed post or whatever. Here's what I will say. A failed attempt is probably the worst outcome of anything that could have happened. I'll say that much.
I disagree. I think a successful attempt, if that had happened...
Well, actually, hold on. We might agree. The successful attempt...
Stop real quick,
it would be an attempt at that point. The successful...
Pause real quick. So, guys, we just hit pretty much the 5-minute mark. Destiny, if you're okay with it, I can let this kind of go on another minute or so, and I'll afford you an extra minute and give you 6. Are you okay with that?
You can let me.
You sure? Okay. All right, then. So we'll complete this out. I'll time it. And whatever I gave Andrew, I will give to you as well on your opening statements if you're okay with that. Go ahead, Bills. Roll the clip back. Thank you, Destiny.
Whatever, might be the worst thing that happened. But if it was the worst thing, it was just because of like the country's reaction afterwards, basically, which is possible. Yeah.
Well, I mean.
So, ultimately, Destiny needs to be able to provide us with what an insurrection actually is, an actual working legal definition, or even a personal one, so we can work off of that to understand the mindset of a person who claims this was an insurrection, even as nobody ultimately is prosecuted for an insurrection. He, to date, hasn't done this for the same reason the Supreme Court and higher courts won't. If they do define it strictly and categorize it strictly, then it's likely Democrats and even Republicans are engaging in them all the time. Nonstop, in fact. I am, in fact, willing to, in the ultimate spirit of good faith, concede that if Destiny just can't really define an insurrection or tell us what goes into that category, and not into the category of a riot, that he really has no business calling anybody an insurrectionist, especially when nobody's been charged with an insurrection in regards to J6. Nobody, and certainly not convicted. I will concede, however, if he concedes Democrats are likely involved in insurrections all the time, using violence for political change, I'll concede Republicans may be as well if his definition is that broad. However, that will eliminate his moral high ground for the justification of do what you want to them because they're traitors. That would also make you a traitor. Okay. With that, I'll cede my time. Note in that video that the entire audience, when he was asked this question by Pisco, said, yes, we would have preferred that Trump was unalive during that assassination attempt. Go ahead.
Okay. So that I have approximately 6 minutes and 45 seconds there. Destiny, I will reset the clock and allot you the same exact amount of time to stay fair here. Let me know when you are ready, and I'll restart the clock.
Yeah, I'm ready whenever.
You ready? Okay, I'm going to start it now. I'll give you 6:45, and go ahead, brother.
All right. I believe that the subject matter of the debate is whether or not January 6th is an insurrection or would be considered an insurrection. Originally, I thought there was going to be a 1v1 debate against me and Andrew, but I can do a 1v2 debate against my 2021 less educated self as well. I have no problem speaking to arguments I've made in prior clips. I have no problem speaking to current arguments made by Andrew. So we can head down that road. I think that the first thing that we need to acknowledge when we talk about the structure of the United States government is that the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is what powers our 3 branches of government, and it sits above every other part of our government, and every part of our government must comport to the Constitution. I think this is a foundational American belief and principle, and if you don't share on this foundational belief, then we're never going to connect in any sort of meaningful way when we talk about how U.S. law or U.S. process or procedure or whatever should be carried out. So that being said, there was an amendment to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and Section 3 of that amendment basically goes on to say that any prior oath taker that has engaged in or aided in an insurrection is no longer allowed to hold office, essentially. Now, the question that we come to today is trying to define what is an insurrection. And while in modern times, it seems like an insurrection is a term left to a dictionary or a term left to internet debaters, at the time that the amendment, the 14th Amendment, was framed, what was an insurrection was pretty well understood. An insurrection includes 4 vital elements. One is an assemblage, meaning a group of people that have come together. 2 is resisting any law or interfering with the course of a government proceeding. 3 is you have to do this by way of force or intimidation. And 4 is it has to be through for a public concern or a public cause, not a private thing that one might be interested in. Just for some understandings of when we say an assemblage, we can look to in 1861, Justice Benjamin Curtis said a combination or conspiracy by which different individuals are united in one common purpose. So not just a bunch of people in a city protesting different things, but a group of people that are united in one common purpose. We can look to Justice Samuel Chase in the case of Fries in the year 1800. He says if a body of people conspire and meditate an insurrection to resist or oppose the execution of any statute of the United States, a statute such as the ECA, the Electoral Count Act, which is what they were united on January 6th to insurrect against. They were opposing the execution of that. They are only guilty of a high misdemeanor, but if they proceed to carry such intention into execution by force, which we did see on the day of January 6th, regardless of if every member engaged in force or just one,
They are guilty of the treason of levying war, and the quantum of force employed neither lessens nor increases the crime, whether by 100 or 1,000 persons is wholly immaterial. Doesn't matter if you have an insurrection of 50 people, 100 people, or 1,000 people. You only really need 2 people there to make it an insurrection. In terms of whether or not they were resisting a law or interfering with the cause of government, we can quote here, an insurrection against the United States requires resistance to any statute or some public law of the United States. This is a quote by Judge in, I think, 1826. Curtis spoke this to a jury. He says, the law does not distinguish between a purpose to prevent the execution of one or several or all laws. An insurrection could be directed at a legislature as well as at executive officials. William Rawle declared that an effort to coerce repeal of a general law to be an overt act of levying war. And Justice Field's opinion in the Great House Court case held that any effort to coerce the conduct of government constituted an insurrection, such as when people went to the White House, or I'm sorry, went to the Capitol to coerce Pence to overthrow the election, which is what Donald Trump told them to do. By force or by intimidation, quoting Justice Marshall in 1807, the most comprehensive definition of levying war against the king or against the United States, which I have seen, requires an assemblage of men ready to act and with an intent to do some treasonable act and armed in warlike manner, or else assembled in such numbers as to supersede the necessity of arms. You don't necessarily need weapons to do it. You could just have the numbers of people there threatening to use force or intimidation. And then for a public purpose, obviously, the insurrection is to, I'm quoting Judge John Kane here, insurrections to redress by force national grievances or to reform real or imaginary evils of a public nature. Obviously, they were protesting the vote. That's what they were there to do. This is obviously a public issue. So to recount, for the assembly, there were hundreds of people that breached the Capitol building. There were thousands that trespassed on federal land. For 2, there was a clear resistance to the federal law. The trespassers were there to contravene the Electoral Count Act. There was a plethora of evidence brought up in the Anderson versus Griswold case about this, where, quoting the justices, quoting the judges on that case, they said substantial evidence in the record showed that the mob's unified purpose was to hinder or prevent Congress from counting the electoral votes as required by the 12th Amendment and from certifying the 2020 presidential election. The third element, the resistance made extensive use of force. This is self-evident just by watching any of the videos. To quote the Colorado Supreme Court again, the mob repeatedly and violently assaulted police officers who were trying to defend the Capitol. Obviously, there were calls to hang Mike Pence, and people marched very famously with 1776 signs, which, as many in this audience might be familiar with, was a very popular insurrection in U.S. history, or a rebellion even, one might say. And then for a public purpose, it was obviously for the public purpose of resisting what they perceived to be as the stealing of the election. Right. There are ways to try to counter this argument. We can either use nonsense definitions of insurrection, but that doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters was the public understanding and the legal understanding of insurrection at the time the 14th Amendment was created and when Section 3 was framed, because that's what the Constitution demands, that we look at what was thought of as an insurrection when the language was added to the Constitution. We can try to divert by talking about BLM or anything else, and I'm happy to dive into all of those examples if we are going to concede on the original argument that January 6th satisfies all 4 elements of what I consider an insurrection to be. If we want to concede that and move on to analyzing any particular BLM action or whatever, that's totally fine. We can talk about the likeliness to work, of which an insurrection has never been defined as. An insurrection doesn't necessarily have to lead to the overthrow of the government. Warning. That would be understood as a rebellion. Every insurrection is not a rebellion, though every rebellion starts as an insurrection. And then when we say, this is a common one as well, why was no one charged with an insurrection? People can be charged or couldn't be charged with crimes for a variety of reasons, but for purposes of the 14th Amendment, nothing in there requires the criminal conviction of the crime of insurrection, only that an insurrection occurred and that one engaged in it or aided it.
All right. And that
2000 in here. So the debate strategy was very good from Andrew from the outset. And the strategy is this, to basically say, listen, I don't have to take, you're in the affirmative. Destiny's arguing this is an insurrection. Why is this debate occurring? Because Destiny has gone on places, including like Piers Morgan, and said anyone at a Trump rally that gets shot has fucked around and found out because they're supporting an insurrectionist, and that's evil and terrible, so you're playing with fire, that's what you get, basically, right? That's Destiny's argument. Andrew's making the broader argument than just this semantic debate, which is, you're full of shit. You're using this to demonize your opponent so you could justify the heinous bullshit you want done, which Andrew does a great job of outlining that right in the opening statement. So he says, seeing as how that's what Andrew's interested in the debate, he fully admits, I will concede the debate right now that January 6th was an insurrection, if you also concede that the Democrats have engaged in insurrections using your definition. And Destiny won't do it. He won't do it. He obfuscates. I was on a Twitter Spaces with Destiny a week ago, And I made the same point. There was this incident May 30th going into May 31st, 2020. In D.C., there were a bunch of barricades set outside the White House into Lafayette Park. Lefties were using weapons to break through the barricades on their way to the White House, including throwing lit flares, caustic liquid, bricks, bottles, injuring officers. They burned down a building that was there that had restrooms and where federal employees worked. They burned it down and were advancing to the White House. That's an insurrection, right? I've brought it up to Destiny many, many times and his supporters. Joseph Newton, Super Chat 999. Thank you. Rob is political #1 wizard. Thank you. Now, Destiny knows of that insurrection, and for some reason, he's chosen not to look into it. He's heard me say that for 3 years. I've debated him over and over. I bring it up to him then. He goes, what do you think I would say, Rob? I said, what you'll say is you'll try to find some meaningless distinction to argue why that's not an insurrection. No, I wouldn't. Now look at this debate. What did he do the whole time? Meaningless distinctions to try to say, well, that wasn't federal. It has to be federal. And even though his definition said impeding like law enforcement or impeding and protesting laws, he's like, well, it's not impeding law enforcement. It's if you're there to protest a law and then it gets out of hand. And Andrew does a great job of like hammering home on that. That's not what your definition says. Your definition doesn't say federal. So Andrew does a great job. And then the other thing Andrew does is he plays 3 clips in the opening statement, all of which were fantastic, and I'm glad he played all 3 of them. First clip shows that Destiny, because this is the truth. How we determine what's an insurrection or not, the truth is most of us aren't looking at it through a legal scope. So when you said January 6th was you weren't thinking, well, legally, what would I call that exact thing? You were like, is a riot. And when you first heard someone say it was an insurrection, probably what prompts in your head is like insurrection, like an attempt to overthrow the government. No, it wasn't that. Violent attempt to overthrow the government? Clearly not. They didn't even bring guns. How the fuck do you think you're going to overthrow the government if you didn't bring guns? Stupid. They basically milled around inside the Capitol. Yeah, there were some clashes with police, but it's clear what happened was there were a bunch of people there, hot, pissed off. Some of them started skirmishing with police. A lot of it looked like police initiated the skirmishing, but whatever. And so they clashed with police. But almost all of them, once they were left into the Capitol or got into the Capitol, they weren't hunting down Congress people and beating them down or anything like that. It's clear it wasn't an insurrection. What happens is people like Destiny, who initially said that, they saw the footage and said, you heard the clip. He said, it was clear if they wanted to actually try to overthrow the government, they would have done more. Then what Destiny realized, like the Democrats, was, it's politically expedient for us to call this an insurrection. So now that's what we're going to call it. So 2021 Destiny said, clearly, if you just look at that, it wasn't an insurrection. None of the facts changed. None of the facts that Destiny originally said was, dude, this wasn't an insurrection. He said anyone objectively looking at this crowd knows they would have done more if it was going to be an insurrection. They didn't. That proves it's not. Nothing he's learned since then has changed that. So him looking up what the technical definition of insurrection is doesn't change that at all. At all. Trump talking about alternate electors doesn't change that at all. It does not. That's the truth. So great on Andrew to play that clip. And I'm glad he brought it up again later in the debate. That was an important point. The other 2 points he brings up goes to the broader conversation of why are we having this conversation. The first clip he plays was from a debate I had with Destiny way back in 2020. 2020, before January 6th. I think it was at the end of May 2020. I call into Destiny's show. It was the first time I ever talked to him. And I wanted to talk about the political violence that we saw coming from the left. I didn't call it an insurrection because I didn't feel it was an insurrection. But it was definitely targeted political violence from the left. If you go back and watch that debate, it is insane the admissions I get. For example, here's an admission I get from Destiny. I said, the conspiracy theorist in me thinks that these Democratic governors and mayors are allowing the riots to occur so that it'll hurt Trump politically. He says, of course! Go back and watch. That's not a conspiracy, of course. That's what he says. That's the party Destiny's voting for. That's he admitting that their leaders allowed riots to occur for political reasons to hurt their opponent. That's what Destiny said. Go back and watch. Now he's going to stand on his high horse 4 years later and say, oh, well, Trump supporters are treasonous and they deserve to be shot. That's his point. Then the point that is played, that is Destiny, right? When I'm talking to him in the spaces from the other day, and it harkens back to, I tell Destiny in that space, I say, remember when you told me that political violence completely legitimate? It's just the other side of the coin to voting? I don't remember saying that. Yes, he did. That's what he said in May of 2020. That's what he said, or maybe it was June, but it was around May or June of 2020. That's what he said. Rioting is the other side of the coin to voting. Now, he did say he was against rioting against private property. He didn't like that Black Lives Matter was doing that. But he has no problem with them rioting against public institutions. That would mean that Black Lives Matter was worse than January 6th, because January 6th only was against a public institution. Didn't burn down people's private property, did it? In other words, Destiny's saying he's for political violence. Violence targeted at political institutions. That's what Destiny said. That's a fucking insurrection based on his definition. So in May of 2020, Destiny's saying, I totally support insurrections. I think they're totally legitimate. That was his argument. Now, what's changed? In effect, what Destiny's argument is, I think that if you get shot, you had it coming. If you support insurrections committed by people I don't like. But if you like insurrections committed by people I do like, well, then that's a perfectly legitimate form of protest. See how that works? You see what he's doing? That's the point. The point is that he's setting up a scenario where he's acting like I can say the most vitriolic shit, even after an assassination attempt, and say that this innocent firefighter that died had it coming because he supported an insurrection, when Destiny 4 fucking years ago gave me the rationale for why he thinks insurrections can be a legitimate form of protest. One set of rules for him and his side, a different set for the other people. That's clip number 2. Clip number 3, and I've said this the whole time. Now, I've defended Destiny. Let me be clear to the audience here. I don't want Destiny banned from X. I don't want him banned from YouTube. I ain't about that. Fuck him. In fact, not only should he not be banned, they should I hope YouTube plasters his fucking videos to the top of YouTube. I hope everyone right before they vote gets to see Destiny, average Democrat Destiny, saying, if you're a Trump supporter, you're fucking around and find out. If you get shot, so be it. Good. Blare that shit everywhere. Sounds good to me. Remember that when you go to the voting booth, normie. That's who the left is. That's who the Democrats are. So I say go for it, man. Where I draw the line is, are you actually calling for violence? And I'm sorry, making horrible jokes about this firefighter being killed, that's not a call to violence. That's a horrible joke. But hey, whatever. I don't have to like the joke. If I don't like it, I'll tune out. But I'm not saying I would never debate him or anything. I would not debate him if I think he is legitimately calling for my death, or legitimately calling for the death of Donald Trump. Then it's over. I don't know that he's doing that. But what I do know is this. That third clip, which I was happy that Andrew used, where Pisco calls in. Here's the other thing. When he tells Piers Morgan, when Piers says, will you condemn this assassination attempt? Destiny says, I won't condemn it for you people. What he's saying there is, I don't respect you people, I owe you nothing. But that's not true of his friend Pisco. And so when his Pisco asked him point blank, do you wish that bullet would have killed Trump? And Destiny's answer was, I don't know what I could say. I'm not trying to Fed post. Well, what I will say is the worst thing that could have happened was him to be shot at and not die. And Pisco, to his credit, me and Pisco have gone back and forth many times. To his credit, it's like, no. Him getting killed would have been the worst. And Destiny's like, well, yeah, basically because it would have helped him politically, helped their side politically. Now, mileage may vary, whether you think that's him just being an edgelord who's throwing a little temper tantrum because the guy that he lied to you about, Joe Biden, that him and all the Democrats lied to you for 4 years about not having cognitive decline. It was made evident to us all, and it looked like Biden was going to lose the election, and it looked like that they were losing a bunch of court cases, so Destiny decided to throw a little fucking temper tantrum, and so he didn't really mean it. Maybe. That's how I look at it. Or maybe you think he did mean it. But the point is, Andrew's correct to point that out is the moment. How could you fucking stand on your high horse about democracy and all this other shit when you made that claim? Not to some randoms you didn't like, to your audience and to your friend. You were asked point blank, did you want that bullet to kill Trump? And you basically intuited, yeah. That's what he did. Now, the one thing I will say, one of the things I'll say to criticize Andrew a little, he should have used those opening statement clips much more throughout the debate. Much more. I think it was an effective opening statement to set the broad discourse for why we're having this debate. So every time Andrew's making the point, dude, you've broadened the definition of insurrection so broad that it includes like a bunch of Democrats and shit like that, including people like Kamala Harris. You're supporting her. And the entire reason we're having this debate is because you implied insurrectionists deserve to be shot. Okay? That's you. That's Democrats. You've defended the insurrections and violence is legitimate. Other side of the coin to voting. You seem to intuit that Trump deserved to be shot. Now what?